Hello, I'm civil rights attorney Carol Powell-Lexing, and welcome to the Carol Powell-Lexing Show, a show that connects you to pertinent issues that affects you, your community, and this country. And normally, before I get into our topic of discussion for today, I do an affirmation. And the affirmation today is from one of my favorite scriptures, Jeremiah 29:11, saying, "For I know the plans I have for you, declared the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not harm you, but give you hope and a future." In other words, God has already laid out the plans for our journey. So remember, it doesn't matter what you're going through. There's still a superwoman living inside of you. And yes, I did take the last part of my affirmation from the documentary, the music in the documentary from Commuted. And I'm excited today to have with me the director of that documentary. But before we get into our topic of discussion, I just want to welcome Nailah Jefferson. Nailah Jefferson. I'm going to get it right. Nailah, welcome Nailah Jefferson here. We're going to be discussing and exploring her dynamic, acclaimed works, which have been distributed domestically and internationally in the film festival circuit, as well as theatrically and televised. I'm excited to have you here today. Welcome here. And before we get started, tell us a little something about yourself. Basically, you are from New Orleans, Louisiana, which I am very proud of, that we have a director from Louisiana, because, you know, everyone always brags about Spike Lee being from the Bronx and New York and everything. And since I'm from Louisiana, you're from Louisiana, I'm very proud to have you here today because I'm very fascinated and intrigued with your work. So just tell us a little something about yourself. How did you get into making documentaries and becoming a director?
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And actually, I thought, kind of growing up, I thought I'd be a journalist. I thought I'd be a TV journalist, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I have a show like this. But as I was applying to college and figuring out exactly what I wanted my major to be, I realized there was a film and television major. And I never thought about how you became a filmmaker. I never thought that I could be a filmmaker until I realized that that was a specific major. I don't know, maybe that's a little silly, but I didn't know. I didn't know any filmmakers growing up here in New Orleans. And so that kind of changed the trajectory of my career. And so instead of going to Boston University for journalism, I attended for film and television. And it had such a rich documentary community in Boston. WGBH is there. At the time, Black Side was there. And so after my freshman year, I got the chance to intern on a documentary. And that's kind of where I fell in love with filmmaking. And, you know, the rest is history, as they say.
And we're glad that you did, because you have produced some of the most intriguing and fascinating works. And I'm glad to be here today to actually discuss some of your works. And one or two documentaries that we're going to be discussing. The first one has to do with Donyale Lunar, the supermodel, which, like, I don't know if most people are like me, but I had never heard of her until I saw your documentary. And thank you so much for bringing that to the forefront, because here we are again having what we call a hidden figure, or someone that has contributed a lot to the fashion industry, but hasn't gotten the accolades that she's due, because we just weren't aware of her until your HBO Max documentary came out about Donyale Lunar. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So growing up, I loved models. This is at a time when people still read magazines. I would collect magazines. I would like tear out pages. Sometimes they were just too precious to tear out. You know, the magazine was done so beautifully. But I always loved models, especially Black models. So Naomi Campbell, Iman, Beverly Johnson. These were the names that I knew. And so I want to say it was in about 2017 Jeff Friday, who is an executive producer on this film and also the CEO of the American Black Film Festival. He said, these producers came to me with this idea to make a film about Donyale Luna, but they haven't made a film before. I really like you as a filmmaker. Would you, take a look at this and see if this is something that you think you could do? And so I was like, wait, fashion model, like that, that just piqued my interest from the beginning. And then I was questioning myself, like, why don't I know this woman? She was before Iman. She was before Beverly Johnson.
Right.
I should know her. And so I started to do my research, and there isn't much. There wasn't. Now I feel like there's more information since the documentary, but there wasn't much about Donyale Luna when I started to research her. There's some writings, a little bit of information here and there. And so I thought this was really, as you said, an opportunity to present a hidden figure. And for her, as Jeff always said, to be uplifted and loved in a way that she couldn't be back in the 60s because she was so far ahead of her time in the way that she lived her life, in the way that she thought, in the way that she presented herself as a model. She was just so far ahead of what everybody else was doing. It was seen as radical and just too out of the box, I think, for the fashion industry to embrace, and also in a way for the Black community to embrace. And so because of that, she experienced extreme racism. She was ostracized.
Now, why would she experience racism? Are you talking about in the sense of because she I guess she came along during the civil rights movement? She came along in the 60s during a time where we were fighting for our civil rights?
Absolutely. Donyale Luna was the first Black woman on the cover of Harper's Bazaar, the first Black woman on the cover of British Vogue. And one of the spreads that she did when she was still living in the States was a spread in U.S. Harper's Bazaar. Her cover was actually an illustration. So some people didn't realize that this was a Black woman on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. But when she was in the pages of Harper's Bazaar, they were photos, Black and white photos of herself. And so you could tell that this was a Black woman. And because of that, because she was published in these pages, Harper's Bazaar got a lot of backlash. Advertisers were pulling their advertising. They received a bunch of letters from subscribers in the American South who said that they would drop their subscriptions because they did not want to see a Black woman in this prestigious fashion magazine.
Wow, that's something. And that was that was in what time period did I guess she kind of peaked? Was it in the 60s?
This was 65 that she was in Harper's Bazaar.
Wow, she was way ahead of her time. Her story is definitely intrigued. She seemed to have been, I guess, wrestling with many issues because of the racism that she was experiencing, and probably she was in battle among herself and trying to, I guess, come to grips with, like, okay, I'm a supermodel. Why am I not being treated like everybody else? And, just the vices that were plaguing her during those particular times. And
yeah, there was that. And then she also had a tough home life. There was abuse that was going on in her home from the time that she was a little girl. And in order to cope, she began to dissociate. And that's actually because her birth name is Peggy Ann Freeman. But when she was just a teenager, she came up with this new persona, Donyale Luna.
Wow.
And I think that's how she was able to really cope and continue to just move forward and press through her days. And in creating this persona, she really leaned on her imagination. And she would tell people that she was from various countries or even that she was from the moon. But this is what she did. And in so many ways people might say, this wasn't helpful to her. It was harmful because she wasn't dealing with her reality. But I think in a way it helped her to dream bigger because she could see her life outside of Detroit and into New York and ultimately London, Paris, and Italy, where she kind of lived her final days.
Right. Well, you have to see yourself in order to sometimes get where you're trying to go. And all she did was she saw herself in a different light. She
Right.
thought outside the box of what
Mhm.
she wanted to be and what she wanted to do. And I guess that goes along with my affirmation, where she was just following the plans that God already had laid out for her. And unbeknownst to her family, that made her life complicated because she had to deal with, like you said, different elements of abuse. She
Mhm.
was from Detroit, Michigan, right? She grew up in Detroit.
Yeah.
When
Detroit,
did she venture
Michigan.
out into the modeling world? How did she get discovered?
Well, she was discovered by photographer David McCabe, and he was in Detroit shooting a campaign for Ford. And he sees Danielle Luna walking by, and he says that she's in the schoolgirl uniform and she has extremely long legs. She was like 6'1".
Wow.
And she's only 14 at the time. So he approaches her and he was like, "You should be a model. You should come to New York." And she said, "But I'm only 14." And he said, "Well, take my card. In a few years, if you decide you want to come out to New York, call me." And that's exactly what she did when she graduated from high school. And she graduated early. I believe she was only 16 when she graduated.
Hmm.
She then got convinced her mother to allow her to go to New York. And she goes to New York and she calls up David McCabe. And I think the first meeting he gets with her is like Marie Claire. And then he
Wow.
takes her over to Harper's Bazaar. He introduces her to Richard Avedon, who, if people don't know, Richard Avedon is like the premier fashion photographer. He's the person who really brought, I think, artistry to fashion photography. He started at Harper's Bazaar, and that's how Danielle Luna met him, and the relationship with Harper's Bazaar began, but ultimately it ended very quickly because of the backlash that Danielle Luna received.
Well, Harper Bazaar was ahead of its time, even having her in the magazine. So
Right.
kudos to them back in the 60s, even though they did receive backlash. And
Hmm.
as it relates to her being in the magazine, they actually did put her in the magazine.
They did. They
So,
did.
so you have that contents out there, which I saw that you put in your documentary because you have some very fascinating contents. How did you go about getting that type of contents to make your documentary?
Well, I mean, because Danielle was a model, there are a certain amount of pictures. There's a good amount of pictures out there. But then also because she married a photographer when she was in Italy,
Oh,
all they did was create. And I want to say they created because it wasn't just him taking photos of her. He tells you that once he met her, he became more serious about his work, more intentional. And she kind of picked up the practices and the tools from people like Richard Avedon, David Bailey, the premier photographers who were shooting her at the time, and helped Luigi, who's her husband, helped him to craft these beautiful images. And so they have a large body of work that we were able to pull from and use in the film, thankfully, because it helped not only bring Luna to life, and you got to see just kind of her
right,
perspective and her point of view
right,
uh, from an artistry point of view, but also it helped to keep the budget down.
right,
So
right.
yeah, so that was really helpful in the filmmaking process.
That's good, good. How long did she actually model in the United States prior to moving to? Then she moved to France, Italy. Where did
She
she move?
moved to London
To
first.
London.
So
Okay.
she was in New York modeling, I want to say 64 for about a year. But the thing is, within that year, she gets her first cover and she gets a huge spread. Like that does not happen to
I
models,
know. That's
particularly
amazing.
Black models at that time. But because of the backlash she received, she knew very early on that her career in America would be limited.
Right,
And so that's why she left. But I mean, imagine if it were today and a
right.
woman like Danielle Luna showed up and within months she's on the cover of Harper's
Wow.
Bazaar. She's in one of their most iconic photo shoots. I mean, that person would be ruling the modeling world right now.
Right.
But
That's what you call
as we said,
supermodel.
exactly. But as we said, she was just ahead of her time.
Right, right. I mean, that story is so fascinating.
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to watch the documentary that's on HBO Max.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's so many, I guess, lessons to learn from that because number one lesson is not where you come from, it's where you're going. Number two, always think outside of the box because you
Yeah.
just never know what God might take you. And as I stated earlier, He knows our plans. And she just tapped into what God had already laid out for her, the plans of
Yeah.
her being a supermodel, because she'd already detached herself from her environment to see bigger and better things that would happen in her life. So that
Absolutely.
in itself is a great story, and that's what you bring out in the documentary. And I enjoyed it. I was intrigued and fascinated with it. I kept rewinding and going back, watching the same thing over and over
Oh, thank you.
because it's just really fascinating. And I mean, you do some awesome work, some very fascinating work.
I appreciate it. I think Danielle Luna is probably the most fascinating person that I've read about, that I've learned about. So I felt really honored to be able to tell her story, bring her story to life, and introduce her to generations of people who've never heard of her.
Right, this black supermodel in the
Mhm.
60s
Yeah.
making headways,
Hmm.
making headways and strides in the fashion industry. That was
Hmm.
definitely unheard of. And thank you for bringing her to life. And
So,
you have another documentary called Commuted, a
yeah.
PBS documentary. And
Yeah.
of course, that's right up my alley because it's dealing with the legal aspect of things. And so,
Mhm.
tell us something about that documentary.
Well, it's interesting because I've been working on Commuted longer than I was working on Danielle Luna. Commuted production of that began in 2017, and Danielle Luna production began in 2021. But that's just the world of filmmaking, you know.
Right,
And now Danielle Luna, Supermodel, has come out before Commuted. So Commuted just had its film festival premiere at the New Orleans Film Festival, where it aired November 2nd. I mean, the response was tremendous. We had 3 sold out shows. And New Orleans just really came to support. So this is a story about a New Orleans woman. And I love that she was really embraced by her community during the film festival. So Commuted is about Danielle Metz, who at the age of 26 was sentenced to triple life plus 20 years for nonviolent drug offenses.
that
This was
that's
an,
that's ridiculous.
that
That
is
is
ridiculous.
totally
It is
ridiculous. You're
ridiculous.
talking about an excessive sentence. That is the
Mhm.
epitome of one. I can see
Right,
why she got commuted, but
right.
um, tell us
Highly punitive. And this was in the war on drugs era, right? Lock them
right.
up, throw away the key. This is what has, I
Bad
think,
laws being made.
absolutely. And it
Hmm.
has totally destroyed Black families for decades and decades. And now we're at a point where I think we're finally looking up and trying to correct those wrongs.
Right.
But
It's about
but it's
time.
been, yeah, it's been a cycle of these families being put into prisons, being destroyed. And that is a very hard cycle to break. But with Danielle Metz, she was sentenced in 1992. She served 23 of those years. And let me also mention that when she was sentenced, she had 2 young children, Carl and Glenisha. They were 7 and 3 years old. And so their mother is sent 2,000 miles away to California to serve out the rest of her life, or so they
Wow.
thought. So 23 years into Danielle's sentence, she is actually commuted by President Obama, thankfully, in 2016. In 2014, Obama introduced the Clemency Initiative, which was specifically targeted towards nonviolent drug offenders because finally we woke up and we realized the damage that we were doing to these Black and Brown communities who had been over sentenced because of the war on drugs. And so I want to say about 1,600 people received clemency through the initiative. And Danielle was actually the last woman to receive clemency before President Obama left office. So she came home in 2016. I met her in 2017, and we quickly realized that we grew up just like 4 blocks away from each other. Um,
Wow.
and that was one of the first kind of entry points into like a personal connection. But we were introduced by our pastor. We attended the same church, and he called me up one day and said, "Do you know Danielle Metz?" I said, "No, I don't know her." He was like, "Well, she has a story. You're a storyteller. You all should get together." And so we did. And As you know, as people know, like true crime is one of like the hottest kind of documentary spaces right
Right.
now.
Right.
But that's not what we wanted this film to be. We really didn't want to focus on the mistakes that Danielle made. We wanted to focus on what is life like for someone who has a highly punitive sentence and is finally given a second chance at life and to come back home. Because I think a lot of people assume after prison, you're just able to come back into the world and kind of
Just pick up
just
where you left
resume
off.
life again. Exactly. But 23 years have passed by. Her
Wow.
children are in their late 20s and early 30s.
Cell
Life,
phones, everything else. The world has completely changed.
everything is different.
Right.
And so this film is very much about Danielle finding her footing in the free world, and also just finding what her purpose is. Because it's also, you think about the mental anguish and trauma that you go through in prison,
Right.
and having to build yourself up enough to believe that you deserve this freedom.
Right.
In Danielle's case, because she's such a phenomenal person, it's not just enough for her to get back home, reconnect with her children, find a job. She then becomes a prison abolitionist. And it's just been incredible for me to witness her journey.
Right. Right. She has
From
become an advocate to help those
absolutely
women.
advocate, not
Right.
just an advocate, an abolitionist, which
An
I think is more
abolitionist.
powerful. She is trying
Right.
to abolish prison for women and girls.
Right, right, right. I mean, the story itself is just incredible. And Danielle
Thank
herself, like you said, is incredible because, as you say, she has become an abolitionist, an
you.
advocate,
Hmm.
a all purpose person to help those that are in need that have, I guess, been wrongfully convicted, have excessive sentence, and people can look to her that's in prison and have hope that that they're going to get out because there's somebody out there fighting for them that's already experienced what are experiencing, and so that itself is an excellent documentary and story that you have put together to help people. And
Thank you. And that goes back to your affirmation, a hope and a future.
right, that's right. The plans, God already. She probably didn't even really realize that in spite of her problems initially that she had, that she would be an advocate or a source to help other people. That she would be fulfilling her purpose in life. She probably didn't see that at the time, but
Right.
her lemons became her lemonade, and she's out doing and fulfilling the purpose that God has already laid out the plan for her. And I know,
Absolutely.
from watching the documentary, she had some rough patches with the children. Of course, the children had to get to get to know their mom, who had been gone away from them from 23 years because they were small when she left. But
Absolutely. And that's still a work in progress. She's only been home about 7 years now, 8 years, I think, in 2024. And I mean, it's just it's a work in progress, but it goes to show the damage that prison does to families. And that is something that we wanted to be honest about in this film, as hard as it is for Danielle to, I think, come to terms with, and even I think her family, that this is just not as easy as we thought it would be when she returned home. But the film has to let people know the impacts of these highly punitive sentences, and
right.
that we need to reverse this course. We have to undo this as best we can, undo the damage, and make sure that we don't continue to perpetuate it in the future. So I'm hoping that this film will really make an impact on legislation, on sentencing,
Right.
and that we'll see a change in course.
Right. And, in the legal system, I always say that I never say justice system because,
Mm,
in my opinion, the system is only good as the people that you put in positions of authority.
yeah.
So, in order for me to use the word justice system, I have to see that there are people working to try to help other people. And
Mm,
I saw in the documentary someone that was in a position of authority, Mr. Kenneth Polique.
yes.
And Mr. Kenneth Polique was very instrumental in Miss Metz
Hmm.
getting out, being commuted, because as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New Orleans, he was the person that you normally first of all, let me just go back and just say when there are two methods of clemency, and just explain the difference between a pardon and a commute and being commuted.
Right.
A pardon is when a person has been being exempt basically from a conviction. In other words, if you have gotten sentenced for about 25 years and you've committed a federal crime, the president can come in and reduce, basically wipe out that conviction. Or the president, if it's a federal crime, can prevent you from going to prison. Like if you have to report to prison after you have been convicted, the president can pardon you and forgive you for the conviction. The commuted part is where if you committed a federal crime, you have the president to come in and basically reduce your sentence. Like we see with Danielle, he cut out her, because it makes no sense the person gets triple life.
Yeah.
Triple life.
Plus 20 years.
Plus 20 years. That in itself showed that there was a crooked system somewhere in place, not only the law, but the people that carried out the bad laws. And so, you know, by the grace of God, you had Mr. Polique to come in later on and write a letter to President Obama saying that I support her efforts. Her conviction and her sentencing doesn't fit the offense, the crime, and, you know, I support her being commuted. So my idea of justice and a justice system started when you had Mr. Polique, who was the U.S. attorney, in a position to say, yeah, I'm not going to support you. I don't want to have anything to do with this. But in other words, he decided that he's going to support it because he looked and saw the wrong that had been rectified or perpetuated on her and probably other women too. And he wanted to rectify that. And when you put good people like that in the position of authority, that's when you have a justice system, not a legal system. So Mr. Polique supported her. He wrote the letter to President Obama. And I guess the rest is history. Miss Metz is out and she is helping other people. And that all became, the public became aware of all of that as a result of your documentary, Commuted.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, another good point of this is that's why it's so important to vote and who we vote for.
Oh, yes.
Because Kenneth Polique, it was only in that position because he was appointed by President Obama.
Right.
President Obama, because of where he came from, understood, okay, Black and brown people are being over-sentenced. This is ruining families. What can we do about it? So it's very important that we elect people who, if they're not from the community, at least they're engaged with the community and they're willing to listen and rectify these problems.
Right.
Yes. I can't push voting enough, especially as we're about to go into a new presidential campaign next year. But, well, I guess the campaign has already started, but we're going to a new presidential election next year. But we have to engage and see how all of this touches us eventually. Right. We might think, these people are so far removed from us, but no, it can really come and touch your home. And in Danielle's situation, only 4 blocks away from me. And then I have other people in my family who have definitely been affected by incarceration, who have been incarcerated themselves. You need to have people in place who do not, who understand that your life is of value. And yes, you may make a mistake, but we cannot just lock you up and throw away the key.
That's right, because the whole idea of imprisoning somebody is for that person to be, rehabilitated. And so you can't throw people away. You have to allow, if that's the purpose of rehabilitation, then they shouldn't be able to stay in there if they're a nonviolent offender. They should not be sentenced to 3 lives plus 20 days in prison or anything excessive if you're a nonviolent offender. And thanks to you, we'll get to see the documentary and get to see Miss Danielle Metz and how she's helping people. And another thing is she graduated from Southern University. She went on and got a degree.
She did. I mean, she's done tremendous things in the short time that she's been home. I'm just so proud. But Commuted, it's not available now, but it will be available in April on PBS. We don't have an exact date, but April is Second Chance Month. So we thought that it was appropriate that Commuted have its broadcast debut then.
Right, and we look forward to seeing it too. I'm so excited. I'm excited about sharing the news and encouraging other people to watch all of your documentaries, especially Commuted and Donyale Lunar. I'm just so excited about the work that you're doing and that you are a Louisianan.
Yes, yes. And you know, the film community here is really thriving. I could list off a bunch of people who are from New Orleans, who at least came to New Orleans, developed things, and have really blown up.
That's good.
So, I
That's great.
mean, I don't want people to think that it's just LA, it's just New York. I think you can definitely come to New
You come to
Orleans
New
and
Orleans.
find a supportive community.
Right, right.
And yeah, this is a good stopping place along your journey if it's not your final stopping place.
Wow, that's nice to know. That's nice to know that good people like you, homegrown, are producing and directing lots of good films for us to look forward to see. And we look forward to seeing some other works that you're going to bring forth after those documentaries. I know that you've done other documentaries prior to the two that we've discussed, but we know that there are great things in the plans already laid out for you to continue to do great things. Basically, what do you want to leave our audience with on both of your projects that we just discussed?
Well, of course, I'd appreciate it if you watch it. They're truly labors of love, and in the work that I do, I really want to give us, Black people, Black community, an opportunity to reclaim our narrative. And I think that's what we've done with both Donyale Luna and Danielle Metz. In the case of Donyale Luna, supermodel, Danielle left us with this great gift of journals and writings and artwork and illustration. And so we just wanted this woman who I feel in many ways people tried to muzzle and tried to diminish her light when she was here with us. I feel like we've just been able to let her soar, her imagination, and everything that made her uniquely her. Right. So we were able to really encapsulate her voice into the film. And so as I said earlier, we want you to just uplift and love her in the way that she couldn't be in the 60s. In the case of Danielle Metz, this is a woman who went to trial and was portrayed as a violent drug offender who was
head of a gang,
a key part of this gang. And that is not what she was. She was a wife, a mother who found herself in an abusive, manipulative relationship.
Right.
But she has come out on the other side of it. And so she's reclaiming her story and she's telling you who she is and Commuted. And above all, she is a dedicated mother with a loving family who I think, despite their struggles, are committed to trying to make it work. And in addition to that, she is a woman who's reaching back and trying to get women who she was imprisoned with freedom and liberation. Right. That's what I love to leave your audience with.
Wow. And, going back to Donyale Lunar, being a country girl myself, I can identify with her separating her thoughts from being on the farm. I separated my thoughts from being on the farm. I'm a farm girl, and coming from a farming family in Monroe, Louisiana, I didn't always dream about being in the cotton field, chopping cotton and doing
my daddy grew up on a cotton farm.
Yeah, I do. We were cotton farmers and soybean farmers. And so one of my little jobs when I was little, because, they start you off working on the farm when you're small. Everybody has to work in the family. So I could see myself way beyond being on the farm. In fact, my parents kind of instilled in me, my dad would always say, if you don't be somebody, not that if you don't go to college that you're not anybody, but that was their way back then, saying that if you want to be somebody, if you don't want to be somebody, I have a hole in the barn with your name on it. And I was like, that won't be for me. So my thoughts, I can identify with Donyale thinking outside the box or wanting to be more than what her environment had her labeled as during that particular time. And then I certainly can identify with Danielle Metz with having represented people who have been wrongfully convicted and had received excessive sentence. In fact, one of my big cases that thrust me into the national spotlight was the Gina 6, where they had sentenced this young man that was a part of the Gina 6. They had put him in prison with a definitely excessive sentence and wrongfully convicted him. So I can identify both with those documentaries. I guess that's why I'm so excited. And I'm excited about spreading the word for people to watch your work and to definitely watch these two documentaries and any other work that you have that will be coming out in the near future. So thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you. And I tell you, great things are starting to happen and will continue to happen for you because you already know the plans.
I know the plans he has for me.
That's right.
I do know that. No, I thank you. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for making space for these two films. And yeah, I hope that we can continue the conversation as more work comes out.
Right. And I welcome you to come back. You can come back in March and April when actually the Danielle Metz documentary comes out. We can rediscuss it because we can never get enough of talking about great things that great people are doing. And Danielle Metz is a great person brought out by your documentary.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, be sure and tune in to the Carol Powell Lexing Show at Carol P. Lexing on X, formerly known as Twitter, and Carol Powell Lexing on Instagram. And you can reach me on any other podcast platforms. Until next time, let's remember, until we meet again, let's keep the discussion going.